Hello and welcome back to Backward Point Podcast. I am your co-host Bashar and you're watching North America's biggest cricket podcast. On this episode, we had the esteemed company of Andrew Leonard. Andrew is an Irish cricket commentator, broadcaster, who I would say is an expert at associate cricket. He loves associate nations. He talked about their growth, what the ICC's role is, what other full member nations' role is to grow associate cricket. And you can just see his passion for associate cricket as from the way he speaks in this podcast. He's also known as Mr. Nepal Cricket just because of the amount of love he gets from Nepal. So he spoke about that and all the crazy story he has from Nepal cricket. I encourage you guys to stick till the end, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot of things about associate cricket in this podcast. This episode is sponsored by Yashi Sports, Canada's home of cricket. Yes, if you are a beginner starting out, or if you're a pro player and you need equipment, expert advice, go to Yashi Sports. Let them know Backward Point sent you, because honestly, they've given us an exclusive discount code of 10% off if you use the code BP10 on your next purchase online or in stores. Support Yashi Sports and let them know Backward Point sent you. Subscribe to the podcast, rate us on the audio platforms, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Here we go. Andrew Leonard. Andrew, firstly, welcome. That's me.
I was told firsthand.
That's a great way to start the podcast.
Perfect intro.
Perfect.
I told you it wouldn't be my phone.
Yeah,
Turned out to be mine, eh?
So as I was saying, thank you for making the trip down. You're
Pleasure.
our first
Great
guest in person in our new studio.
It's amazing. I'm really, really impressed. Great job, you guys.
Thanks. For people who may not know who Andrew Leonard is, would you mind giving a brief overview of your background, what you've been through?
This is where Irish people are really bad at A, taking any praise, or B, talking about themselves too much. I'm a man who adores cricket. Really lucky now to be working full-time as a cricket broadcaster and commentator around the world, but I've actually worked in cricket in some capacity since basically full-time since 2010, so for about a decade and a half. Failed former player, failed former coach, kind of enjoyed my administration, had 3 or 4 years of Cricket Ireland, 3 or 4 years then after with ICC, which was an amazing life experience. And then very, very accidentally stumbled into commentating and broadcasting and absolutely adoring my rather bizarre journey through the sport that's probably given me absolutely everything in my life. Yeah.
The first time that I heard of you was when you did the Sky Sports Cricket preview for the last T20 World Cup. You were with Nasser Hussain, Athers, and one thing that stood out about you was just the passion that you were talking about for associate cricket. So where does that passion for associate cricket come from?
Well, even though Ireland's technically a test nation right now, I think very much in our essence, we've always been an associate. We were an associate my whole life till we gained status 5 or 6 years ago. And I think we're very much still an associate at heart. Being from a small country like Ireland, where, growing up, it was 3.5 million people. It's a bit more like 5 or 6 now, but you very much are instinctually backed to support the underdog and support the little guy in life and the David versus the Goliaths of these world. And that then just transpons over into sport. So, it's funny you mentioned that podcast with Sky. I've done so much cricket now in terms of coverage all around the world and in the most disparate and amazing parts of the cricketing world, and both the kind of well-known cricketing parts and the less well-known. And I've never really had as much feedback about anything as I've done as that Sky podcast. And I think that's mainly because of the quality of Michael Atherton and Nasser Hussain and the way in which I suppose they helped to tell that story of this being a very transformative World Cup earlier in the year at the T20 with 20 teams for the first time and an actual proper open draw World Cup rather than those preliminary stages that we've had in previous T20s. And Michael Atherton, absolutely happily say, I think he's probably both the best commentator in the world and maybe alongside Gideon Hay, the best cricket journalist in the world. And he called me for about 45 minutes the day before. And I couldn't believe the scale of research and preparation he'd done. I did know him a little bit from ICC days when he would have worked as a broadcaster for us. And we kept in touch a little bit because we shared a lot of views and passions on the game, wanting to expand as opposed to its kind of restrictive state actually in the era that when I was working for the ICC, ironically, which I did find tough. When they were reducing the World Cup to 10 teams and the like, and all the kind of the political overhauls at that stage. But adored doing that. And I guess one of the biggest privileges of my life has been to shine a light on the men and women and young cricketers coming through the associate nations who are playing that David versus Goliath role. They're the best stories in our sport, and they come from associate cricket. They get more exposure now than they ever have, but they still, for me, don't get as much exposure as they deserve.
You said that at the essence, Irish cricket is still sort of associate cricket in their heart. Why do you think that is? And why do you think that Irish cricket doesn't get as much test cricket as other nations do?
Irish cricket is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
It has the most wonderful, very small following. You're talking 10 to 15,000 tragic cricket-obsessed badgers who will know as much about cricket as any people you meet anywhere in the world. And they're particularly passionate about Irish cricket. I'm one of them. It's still a minority sport in Ireland. I think for those who might look at Ireland from an international perspective, whether that's at the World Cups or whether that's with us now playing test cricket, they'll look at us and they'll say, Irish cricket's a big thing. You've got really good world-class players in the men's and women's game, your Josh Littles, your Paul Sterlings, your Orla Prendergast, your Gabby Lewises. But you'll also not maybe know that it's a tiny Irish cricket community that's about 100, 120 clubs. It might be a few more than that, but a lot of those are very social clubs. There's, really... They're selecting their national teams from 30 or 40 players tops in men's and women's cricket.
Mm-hmm.
So they massively punch above their weight. They have done since they really came onto the international scene in the early 2000s. And I think will always be an associate at heart. There has been, some who've said, oh, well, maybe test status hasn't been that good for us because there's an awful lot of things that have come with it. Albeit that you do get a lot more funding, there's also a lot more requirements at, developing your own domestic structures, your first-class cricketers, although they're not playing red ball cricket right now, but your interprovincial cricket, and there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. And the real reason they haven't played as much test cricket as they would have liked, it costs a lot of money.
Mm.
And they probably haven't quite found a way to balance those books in terms of the players want to play more and more test cricket with how they're actually going to be able to do that from a financial perspective. We're only just now in the new rights cycle of the ICC. So that's 2024 to 2031, although they have actually split that cycle into 2 years. And that's all really boring administration stuff that I only really know well because I worked at ICC. But in essence, when Ireland ascended to test status alongside Afghanistan in 2018, they did it mid-cycle. So there wasn't actually the funding or the provision for them, Ireland or Afghanistan, to be funded like the other test nations. Whereas now, even though they don't get as much as in India or in England or in Australia, they are up towards the levels of a Zimbabwe and West Indies, Sri Lanka. They're not quite at the same amounts, but they're getting maybe 8-9 times as much as the leading associates.
Mm-hmm.
So from a funding perspective, they should be doing, both Ireland and Afghanistan should be doing much better. Afghanistan are probably, they've nosed ahead of Ireland, haven't they,
Yeah.
in particularly in white ball cricket. But I think Ireland have done an amazing job at playing well in red ball cricket, despite the fact they don't have a first-class structure
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have access to county cricket.
Mm-hmm.
They beat Afghanistan. I was really lucky to be there on call for their historic first test victory in Abu Dhabi. And they backed it up by beating Zimbabwe in a really entertaining test there in Belfast this summer. And the players, you chat to them, I think, and I don't think it was just the emotion of the moment. Many of them said that was the highlight of their career.
Mm.
And this is the same group of players. Someone like a Paul Sterling was there when they beat England in the 2011 World Cup. And he's saying, no, this was even better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the prestige that Test cricket still held within the player groups.
Some of the people, some of the players in the Irish team, like Kevin O'Brien or Boyd Rankin, were some of your friends. What were their lives like initially when they were playing cricket for Ireland, let's say a World Cup or a series? Because I'm guessing Cricket Ireland doesn't really pay them enough to have a full-time gig as a cricketer. So do they have like part-time jobs or full-time jobs that would take breaks from to go and play cricket?
There's been a huge transition. So the era of 2007 and 2011, even though there was a couple of guys on full-time contracts in 2011, it completely different to what they are now. Every single player, men's and women's, are fully contracted full-time professional cricketers with amazing support teams. The men's and women's support teams for Ireland, the coaching staff and the S&Cs and the physios are exceptional. And that's actually, I think probably in many ways the best part of the organization. That they have two very elite performing sides that are really well supported and resourced. Kind of growing the game outside of that is where it's difficult, because cricket's maybe the 11th, 12th, 13th most popular sport in the country. We've got a very wet climate. We've got the history of a kind of difficult relationship with England, and some people in Ireland would still see cricket as somewhat inherently English, even though I challenge that massively. And it's a very different, diverse and wonderfully brilliant game in this era. So in 2007, we had a postman in the team and a carpet salesman and an electrician and a farmer. Boyd Rankin was a farmer. He worked in his dad's farm. So he was able to say to his dad, look, I've got to stay in the Caribbean for 6 more weeks. But others had to call their boss genuinely and say, I've got to get some time off. We've got to go and play India. India were knocked out. What am I talking about? We've got to go and play Australia and South Africa.
Yeah.
But India were knocked out by Bangladesh. Pakistan were knocked out by Ireland.
Yeah.
We've got to go and play South Africa and Australia and Sri Lanka in the Super 8s. We've got to go and face Matai Muralitharan on a Turner, you know? and then 4 years later, a couple of the players on contracts. And look, Cricket Ireland, one thing they have done an amazing job at is get all that professionalism in place and get those players on a full-time contracts without the accessibility to county cricket anymore that ended in 2018. Because that era, the guys who were pros, they were overplaying at counties and playing as locals, as kind of within the wider European Union. But now with test status coming in, our players being treated as overseas players, the only way someone like George Dockrell played for Lancashire this summer as one of the 2 overseas slots. Mm-hmm. Harry Tector's done it for Gloucestershire.
Didn't Tim Murtagh also play?
Tim Murtagh was actually what we would describe as an adopted Irishman. So he spent his whole career initially at Surrey and then at Middlesex. But he had Irish roots and he was able to come over to us. But again, 2018, he ended up because of that exact reason, or maybe 2019, something like that.
One of the great minds in Irish cricket was Eoin Morgan.
Mm.
What did you make of him going to England, becoming their captain, and then having his journey? Like, what's the Irish POV on that?
Yeah.
It's really funny. I think the Irish cricket view of that would very much be one of our own done good, if that makes sense. I know that sounds counterintuitive because he represented Ireland at a very elite level at a very young age. He debuted, I think, at 16, made 99 in his ODI debut. Colin McCallan ran him out. Was just at a wedding with him where he was the best man. Paul Sterling was getting married, and he's still a close friend of mine. He's a guy I played a lot of cricket with growing up. I think I'm 2 years older than him, or maybe 18 months older than him. So he was always in my kind of the group 2 or 3 years beneath me. But he would always be playing against me because he was so good. And actually, I'll give you a little funny, this is slightly self-indulgent, so please accept my apologies.
No, please go ahead.
And I only know this because my dad told me. I don't remember doing it. I've taken 1 hat-trick in my life. Owen will never see this, I hope. And he'll probably claim it's not true, but I promise you it is.
This is a soundbite, by the way.
No, this is 100% true. I've taken 1 hat-trick in my life, and it was Pembroke against Rush, his initial club. It was an under-13s game. So he was probably 10, and the second wicket was Eoin Morgan clean bowled.
Wow.
And when I say clean bowled, I just saw the scorecard which said bowled. I can imagine it as a beautiful flight of leg break that cut him in half.
We're going to make this out like it was a googly, it paced, it turned like
would have been a leg break back
miles.
then.
He left the ball.
Left the ball. Yeah.
Didn't have the googly at 13. But no, genuinely, my dad was the scorer, the team scorer. And my God, for a man who didn't know anything about cricket, and I badgered him into loving cricket, he watches everything now.
Yeah.
And him doing the scorebook for us my whole life was a big part of my life. And he was a busy man. He was an architect, and he was running a practice that he always had a million things to do, but he somehow managed to get to basically every game I ever played. And I don't know, it was 15 or 20 years later, I was probably 30. He said, "You won't believe what I've found." And I said, "Oh." So what? He goes, "Oh, when you got a hat trick when you were a kid." I was like, "Mark, that was like 20 years ago, 13. I was like, "Yeah, we've never got one since." And he's right, I've only ever had one. And he goes, "You won't believe who the second wicket was." He's just lifted the World Cup for England or whatever he'd just done. So yeah, look, sorry, to answer your question, I think the common Irish sports fan who might not understand cricket because of the political relationship between Ireland and England, like any small nation living in the shadow of a big nation, like in New Zealand.
Or Canada.
or you may say Pakistan.
Yeah. That's 2 on us.
There's always a strange relationship. It's just a unique relationship. So I think a casual Irish sports fan might go, "Oh, that guy has sold out and he's gone to England, and how could you ever represent England," and all that. But I think forget about who it was for. I think you're right in what you said. He's probably one of the world's most foremost cricket minds. He quite simply revolutionized the white ball game, the way in which it was played. And if you think that's the same captain who sat in front of a press conference after they lost to Bangladesh at the Adelaide Oval in 2015, close to the edge of tears, being harangued by a rabid English press, reduced and belittled to within an inch of what any human could take. You know what the English press can be like. And to take that team to an over 70% winning record, to come within inches of winning a T20 World Cup, although secretly I was quite happy that West Indies won that one in Kolkata. I was pitch side for that one working for ICC. And then to lift the World Cup at HQ, although Scott Starris will always remind me, they didn't beat New Zealand, they tied with them.
Yeah. And he won't be wrong. He won't be wrong.
Beat them. But what an amazing story. And I think he's a guy who's matured beautifully. He's always been a fascinating character, very focused and steely, cold, driven character. A little bit different to what a lot of Irish people are like, being honest with you. But I think he's a hell of a guy. And yeah, he's, funnily enough, he's pretty much Paul Sterling's best mate. He was his best man at his wedding. That's why I was catching up with him last week.
Yeah, truly revolutionized how white ball cricket is played to this day.
I want to take things a bit further, and I want to understand how, because you work with the ICC, what are the steps actually being taken there to expand cricket into other parts of the world?
It's a really complicated question, and I think the casual fan will go, well, hold on, that is surely the pure remit of the ICC. To try and understand the ICC is this would take a several hour podcast, but to synopsize it, they probably aren't the traditional sporting governing body that every other sport has. And I'm not saying that in a positive or negative light, that's just the reality of it. They are very much a member-led body, and it's also a split membership. So there are full members, 12 of those that are the Test Nations, and there's 96 associates that have a completely different quality of representation within the organization. They have merely 3 associate representatives for the 96 out of basically the key things that run the organization are the board. So there's 3 associate reps on that, alongside 1 from each of the full members, and then the chair as well, and some independent directors. And then for the Chief Executives Committee, again, there's only 3 associate representatives. And even how they're elected and selected is very political. Because you can imagine the European kind of core of 30 countries is going to say, well, we got to get one on. The Asian guys are saying we got, and the African guys. So you might not necessarily fundamentally end up with a complete representation of the wider cricketing world that is very much a global game these days. As a consequence, mainly what the ICC does, as opposed to maybe growing the sport and being solely responsible for that and developing the sport, and you'd think of, development programs and all these kind of things, they're probably more heavily focused on running really good events and generating as much revenue as possible to then distribute back to their members. And a lot of people criticize the ICC. They say, oh, ICC, look at them taking all that money and they've got all this money and they do nothing with it. They don't, it's a non-for-profit. They don't actually, it's not like they poured some money in a safe in Dubai in the desert. They generate as much revenue as they can, they pay their costs, and then they distribute the rest of the funds back to the members. And then it's actually, by the way the organization is set up, it's the members' responsibility to develop cricket within their own country. Now, there are support services from the ICC that very much work in tandem with those members, particularly the leading associate members and the lower and the full Test Nations, to get good structures in place, coaching pathways, playing pathways, school pathways, promotional pathways to help grow the sport. But it's not like ICC is a 500 or 600 or 5,000 or 6,000 bodies on the ground developing the sport. The staff there is still probably 140, 150 people. Whereas I can only imagine what size FIFA is. FIFA probably has tens of thousands of employees. Yeah. So it's a different structure. There's historical and political and cultural reasons for that, as to where the power base of cricket is. Even the fact that, it's obviously moved to Dubai about 2 decades ago. That's probably the shift towards, where a lot of the money in the game is in the subcontinent. I think there's an awful lot of really good people in the ICC doing some really hard work and trying their best within some structures and setups that are never going to make it really easy to click your fingers and overnight turn it into a global game. But one of the most transformational things they did was in 2018 give everyone T20I status. There has been some absolute mismatches as a consequence. Nepal have the record for the highest T20I score of all time. Dipender Singh Airi has set a record that will never be broken. Yeah, by hitting a 9-ball 50. It's not possible to do it faster than 9 balls. Yeah. And I think we're going to see some real mismatches next month. Zimbabwe are going to be taking on Gambia and the Seychelles in the ICC T20 World Cup Sub-Regional Qualifier B, hosted in Kenya, because Zimbabwe didn't get to the last World Cup. Yeah. So they've got to go back to the sub-regional level. And Gambia, who are ranked 99th in the world, are going to have to play against Richard Ngarava and Sikander Raza. Like, that's going to be a mismatch before even knowing anything about Gambia or Seychelles.
Yeah.
But I think that result has actually been a really good thing. That and the fact that we're into the Olympics now, all of a sudden, we're probably not going to see the results in 5 years from the Olympic decision or in maybe even 10 years. But over decades now, there's a real chance and a real optimism and a positivity. That coupled with, in the men's game, once every 2 years, 20 team World Cups. And hopefully with the women's game, I think they're expanding from 10 to 12. I'd love to see that get to 16. I'd love to see the men's go to 24. And I think there is the depth there for that eventually. There's all of a sudden, a load of reasons for countries to get engaged in cricket and actually have, reward and pathway. And like the story, I don't think about Uganda getting to that World Cup and go, they were bowled out for 40 by New Zealand or whatever it was. I think about the guys in floods of tears and those dancing on the streets in celebration in the capital city when they found out that their country was going to a major World Cup in any sport for the first time. They'd been to a couple of netball World Cups. Due respect to netball, like going to a cricket World Cup, seeing the cricket cranes flag on a global stage.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable stuff. And that's, for me, what sport's about. It's about chasing dreams and living out those dreams in reality.
You spoke about the mismatch oftentimes when some of these big teams face these associates. And I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword where if Uganda does not face New Zealand, how do they improve? But if they do face them, they get knocked over. So, I mean, what's the middle ground there?
It's a really difficult balancing act, isn't it? I think at World Cups, you absolutely just have to accept you're going to occasionally have mismatches. I think the great thing is in the T20 format, particularly if they got the schedule a bit better, I think it will be better in India and Sri Lanka. There was a whole load of reasons we were having kind of strange schedules for USA and the Caribbean. And the reason why, if you think about the vast majority of TV money coming from India and what Star Sports contribute to the global game is incredibly valuable, billions of dollars, quite literally. So they do dictate the schedule somewhat. But because the next one's in India and Sri Lanka, I'm hoping that we'll see 3 group games in a day. So and I would hope that we'll go, 2 p.m. India time, 5:30 p.m. India time, 8 p.m. India time, and you'll just roll. Imagine that's a feast. It's a festival of cricket. So if Uganda are hammered in the morning by New Zealand, it's not the end of the world. We're talking about the afternoon game then. And also, like 25 years ago, Japan were beaten 140-17 by New Zealand. And then 20 years later, they beat South Africa by a point at the World Cup, one of the best sides in the world. If you don't give these teams opportunities and a pathway and a way to develop, there is no way for them to get better. Ed Joyce, probably one of Ireland's greatest ever players, maybe the greatest. He said it perfectly in 2015. He was put up for a press conference. Ireland were beaten by 200 runs by South Africa. Dale Steyn,
Morne Morkel,
Kyle Abbott blew them away. Like it was a hammering. I think AB de Villiers got 100. They got 440. Ireland got 200. And that sat in a press conference. The press said to him, "Oh, well, does this result today not show exactly why you shouldn't be at the World Cups and why it should be 10 teams?" And he goes, "No, quite the opposite. It shows exactly why we have to be at World Cups. How can we improve if we don't play against players that are better than us? They're not pretending to be better than South Africa. And sadly, on the day we're recording this, Ireland have lost to South Africa again by 8 wickets. Well, I'll deal with that trouble inside. But you have to give them that opportunity, that exposure, and then manage the expectations. And also, you need to give them support in the preparation to get them as well prepared for those series. Now, in fairness to the ICC, what they've done with their pathways is exceptional. Cricket World Cup League 2, which Canada are excelling in right now, that's only in its second edition. And I felt, as you probably saw on that Nasser and the Sky Sports podcast, I was saying I think this is the best prepared associates that have ever been there. The difference in this second cycle now, they're the best prepared ever from an ODI perspective. Those 7 sides have played 36 ODIs each. The 8 teams now will do that again. This time they're stapling on these T20 series, one of which will get going tomorrow. So all of a sudden they're going to probably play 20, 30 T20Is in the cycle as well. The better funded and more mobile associates like Scotland will take opportunities against Australia. We saw UAE beat New Zealand last summer. Once they get more exposure against at the associate level against the best associates at T20s, I think they're going to be even more competitive. I was actually disappointed with this World Cup, only 2 wins for the associates against the full members. I thought we'd see 4 or 5, and there was some ridiculously close calls. Problem is, the casual cricket fan does not care about a close call. Nepal, South Africa was for me the game of the tournament. I'm probably a wee bit biased, but that was the most incredible game of cricket I've ever seen. And they were within literally centimetres of being maybe the only side to beat South Africa in the tournament, because South Africa easily could have won that final, as you well know. So how do you not want to see more of that? I can't get my head around how people wouldn't want to see more of Dipender Singh, why you wouldn't want to see Mohammad Rizwan smash the ball everywhere at a T20 World Cup, why you wouldn't want to see George Munsey and Mark Watt. Like there are Aaron Johnson, unbelievable ball striker, one of the best I've ever seen. So the talent going around the associate game is unbelievable. It's so good. I think people are only starting to wake up as to how good it is. Is it inconsistent? Yes. Is it imperfect? Yes. Are they getting better and better all the time? Yes. And those lower full members are there ripe for the taking. The top 3 or 4, there's a gap to beat an India and Australia and England when they're at their best, or a South Africa, is very tough. But I'll tell you something, put them up against the West Indies, as Scotland have shown several times. Look what the Netherlands did to the West Indies, the qualifier last year.
One of the biggest headlines the past few months was USA beating Pakistan and making it to the Super 8s. I mean, that just put cricket on the map. ESPN reported on that. Bleacher Report reported on that. CNN.
MSNBC.
New York Times. It was the New York Times.
I was on CNN World Sport 3 times during that tournament. I couldn't believe my schoolmates were like, Lenny, what's going on here now? You're chatting to your man Patrick Snell on CNN World Sport. And I was going, look, you tell me. I don't know what's going on either. And it was that big a story. And for me, genuinely, that wasn't a surprise. I actually think with Pakistan's inconsistency, I just commentated on the Pakistan-Ireland series in Clontarf in Dublin. Ireland should have won that series 2-1. Pakistan played quite poorly. And they've just beaten Bangladesh, USA. They've got such an amazing crop of players now. I think Stuart Law has done a brilliant job with them. I've got to give him huge credit in amongst some challenging political circumstances, the working environment there in American cricket. And I wasn't even surprised they beat Pakistan. I genuinely wasn't.
I have a list of some recent upsets, right? So we have UAE beating New Zealand, Ireland beating Pakistan, USA beating Pakistan, Afghanistan beating New Zealand, USA makes it to the Super 8s, and Afghanistan make it to the semifinals of the T20 World Cup. And then back in the day, Kenya also made it to the semifinals of the 2003 ODI World Cup.
Yep.
So we have examples of these associate to sort of younger, newer teams having now a knack for beating these bigger teams. And when that is happening, I still don't, the baffling decision to me still is that the ODI World Cup gets reduced to 10 teams. That doesn't make sense to me. And it just seems like a cash grab. And it, I understand that it's a business and that the ICC has to make money so that the cricketing world, thrives, et cetera, et cetera. But it just smells so bad to me sometimes that this is what's going on just so we can have a certain team play as many matches as possible. It just reeks of like capitalism and just, it's not where the spirit is of the game. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, for me, it was not a good thing. It's that simple. My big focus now is the fact that it's done, it's gone. And all I'm thinking about is a 14-team World Cup. I think it's probably the right number as well.
Yeah.
I think for ODI cricket, it's kind of funny. I'm actually an advocate of what they've done in terms of the statuses. I think somewhat restricting ODI status is actually a good thing because particularly for the leading associates, that's the pinnacle of their game. They're not playing multi-day cricket anymore. The Intercontinental Cup is gone. Maybe one day it will come back, but I think those 8 sides that have ODI status, and they're going to have to fight hard to hang on to it now because the Challenge League teams are going to nip at their heels. Like Canada had to get through the Challenge League in that last cycle to then take that status off Papua New Guinea. And they deserve to, and they're probably a better team, and they probably were a better team 4 years ago, but they missed out down in Windhoek. But look, 14 teams is a good number. I think the structure allows then for a lot of, because it's going to be 2 groups of 7 with the Super 6 after. It's going to be quite a long tournament.
Yep.
But it allows for, I suppose, the broadcasters to get what they want in terms of the big teams playing against each other lots. I wouldn't rule out even one of the associates maybe making it to that Super 6. You look at what USA are doing right now, it's quite phenomenal. I think the Netherlands and the Scots are outstanding sides. I know Nepal have had a poor time here, but their potential is absolutely crazy as to where they can go maybe in 10 years rather than in 5 years or 2 years. But Yeah, but look, I grew up loving World Cups. I think World Cups are should be celebrations and carnivals of our sport. Did I feel that was the case in 2019 and 2023? Probably a little less so. I also just think that a 10-team round robin where everyone plays each other is just a fundamentally flawed structure. Like, what other World Cup does that? You have to have some jeopardy within a World Cup to make it entertaining.
Yep.
You have to. And the problem is the broadcasters might not want that because of what happened in 2007.
Yeah.
There's a strong argument that if Ireland didn't beat Pakistan on St. Patrick's Day, and if India didn't lose to Bangladesh either the day before or the day after that, none of this ever would have happened.
Yeah.
But we are where we are. I think we've got to a position where I think 20 teams is the right number. I actually think 24 is definitely possible for the T20 World Cup. I think one T20 World Cup every 2 years and one ODI World Cup every 4 years.
So 4 groups of 6?
No, it's 2-7. 2 groups of 7.
No, if you're saying if you have 24 teams.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could go one of 2 ways.
Yeah.
I'd probably quite like to see 4 groups of 6 where they get 5 games each.
Yeah.
But we'll leave that to the structure. I'm just purely commenting upon the depth of world cricket. Zimbabwe weren't there. And Zimbabwe, the previous T20 World Cup, were busy beating Pakistan in Perth.
We remember.
We'll keep bringing up games that Pakistan lost.
It's a torture event for us, honestly.
UAE had beaten New Zealand early in the summer. They lost to Nepal in the semi-final. They're beaten quite heavily in the Asia qualifier. They're more than good enough. I think what Italy are doing is really exciting. They've got some incredible players coming through. And, you look at a Bermuda who trying to come back. I'd love to see Kamel Everock back playing for them if that's possible. And again, Papua New Guinea, people might say, oh, well, they've just cruised through the East Asia Pacific region. They were within 2 overs of beating West Indies in Guyana. And this is my point about the near misses no one remembers. I live and breathe every one of them. And I'm watching it like tearing, well, I'd have no hair, but, rubbing my bald head going, oh my God, they were so close. And the problem is people don't care about the near misses because they're not bought in, I suppose, in the way that some of us are to the associate game. But there has been so many, like you reeled off a decent list there. You left out Uganda beating Zimbabwe. Like that's one of the biggest upsets actually purely in terms of the scale of the difference in the rankings of all time. We've seen Saudi Arabia beat Hong Kong this year. Hong Kong, are a side that have been to World Cups. More recently, they were in an Asia Cup less than a year before Saudi Arabia beat Hong Kong. And that's with home-produced players from Saudi Arabia. So like there's all these pockets of the cricketing world that are just starting to pop up and thrive. And there is definitely the case you can make that those that are allowed to focus exclusively on T20 cricket, so 32 nations in the world play 50 over cricket and up. But those kind of on the precipice of that, like now I know Kuwait have come into the Challenge League, but Kuwait and Qatar, these kind of countries have actually had such a focus on the T20 game, turned into really dangerous T20 sides because it's all they do. And they do a really good job at playing lots of T20Is. I think the side that played the most T20Is in 2023 wasn't Australia, wasn't England, wasn't West Indies, wasn't even India. It was Uganda. So these countries have been, I know it sounds like a silly thing, T20I status. And what is status? But the ICC granting everyone that 5-6 years ago has really transformed so much. And again, we're only seeing parts of the fruits of that right now. At that point, the T20 World Cup was once every 4 years. So like for a country now like UAE that's missed out on that last World Cup, they were devastated too. And they're a cracking side. I'll tell you, Mohammad Rizwan at the top is world-class. Ayan Afzal Khan, left arm spinner, he's 19 or whatever he is. Yeah. Unbelievable player. Like, and you've seen it, he does it in the ILT20 over and over again. Junaid Siddiqui's a proper
He's always the highest wicket taker here in T20.
Yeah.
Every year.
And they're brilliant cricketers. Yeah. So you're talking about, they've missed out, so they've got to go back to the sub-regional level, and they'll have to scrap to get through that. I'm telling you now, we've just seen Hong Kong miss out in the sub-regional. Malaysia and Kuwait have got through. So you're talking about it's cutthroat associate cricket, but what it gives you is there's a constant narrative. There's a narrative the whole time. In fact, the first qualifier for that next T20 World Cup in 2026 was taking place while the T20 World Cup was going on. Very few people knew it, but down in Italy were getting one step closer to 2026. They won their sub-regional and they'll have a real chance of getting past the Netherlands or Scotland next summer.
So just in this 5-minute soliloquy that you just...
Sorry.
No, I love it. I'm trying to understand because we're deeper into the trenches of the cricket world. So we understand what you're talking about with these leagues and the sub-regionals and whatnot. If there's a casual fan who wants to understand how associate cricket actually functions, what's the layout? What's the roadmap? How does the flow chart look like? Where do we go?
Yeah, so I suppose let's just write off Red Bull cricket.
Yep.
There is no test cricket structure, so that means that the associates can focus purely on 50 over and T20 cricket. There's 20 teams in the 50 over structure. 8 of those are the 8 elites that have ODI status, the sides that we've seen here, 3 of them in operation right now, Canada, Nepal and Oman. And at the same time, there was a concurrent series down in Windhoek in Namibia. So that was Namibia, USA and UAE, and the Netherlands and Scotland are also in that league. So they're the 8 best associates, and rightly so. The 12 beneath that then also play in the Challenge League. They'll play over the course of 2 years, 3 6-team competitions. One of them is going on right now, the Cricket World Cup Challenge League A down in Kenya. So that's your Kenyas, your Denmarks, Papua New Guinea. I'll get them all, but there's 12 teams there. I think Kuwait are actually in that. They beat Denmark on the opening day as well. So they're playing out for 2 spots to get up and try and challenge those leagues in Group A and Group B. So
it's a promotion and regulation type.
Yeah, but it all comes down, it's over a 3-year cycle. They've kind of weighted it to favor the incumbents. And I think rightly so, because those with ODI status have earned that. So you've got to finish in the top 2 of those challenge leagues to then go to a playoff with the bottom 4 of the qualifier. The bottom 4 of League 2, excuse me. So those 4 teams come up and join the bottom 4 of League 2. Right now, the likes of Nepal, Oman, UAE, and Namibia, they're in trouble. They're the bottom 4. But it's a 2.5-year cycle. Will only finish in December 2026. And then the sides that are 7th and 8th are in real jeopardy. If they finish beneath the sides that come up from the Challenge League, they lose their ODI status and they drop down a division. Mm-hmm. And that's almost more of a, like you get extra funding, you get extra fixtures.
Which is what happened in Canada, right?
Exactly right. So they're back to the ODI level of funding. Then outside of that, at the T20 level, every single ICC member is entitled to enter a men's or a women's team to qualify for the T20 World Cup. Mm-hmm. And each of the 5 regions will then operate sub-regional competitions and then regional finals. And each, although they have changed it slightly this year, which is a bit controversial, but as of the last cycle, it was 1 for Americas, 2 for Europe, 2 for Africa, 2 for Asia, 1 for East Asia Pacific. Yep. They've now merged each Asia Pacific with Asia, and that's going to be a 3-team spot with a 9-team final. Not quite sure that's going to work. Presume they're all going to play each other once. It'll be a hell of a tournament, no doubt. But it means that there's basically constant commitments within the ICC pathways that you almost always have cricket. You definitely have cricket every year. And a lot of the leading associates will have a huge amount of cricket every year. I think each of the Cricket World Cup League 2 teams will host 3 series. And then what they've done in this cycle, the big change is they're tacking on these T20 series to them where they can within reason. So like next month, we head down to Texas, where it's going to be USA, Nepal and Scotland. Scotland weren't able to quite fit it into their schedule to play the T20s. So USA are playing Nepal in 3 T20s under floodlights at Grand Prairie. We can only imagine how many fans are going to be there. And then the 6 critical Cricket World Cup League 2 ODIs will follow. So each of the series will look a little bit different just depending on the time of the year and the schedule. But it basically means that there's close to 0 games without context. Mm-hmm. And then I think what a lot of the leading associates have to do better, and some of them do well, is find ways to play full members. So USA played Bangladesh in a prep series for the World Cup. Scotland took advantage of the fact that Ireland pulled out of hosting Australia, and Australia were going to England by hosting them for 3 T20Is. We saw New Zealand do the same when they were going to play Pakistan. They played UAE in a couple of T20Is. Yeah. It's happening more and more. And I would just really appeal to the full member nations to try and help their nearest neighbours in particular, and also see the benefit in it. Like, look at how well Australia have been prepped for their series by going and playing 3 games in Scotland. When Pakistan had a brilliant tour of England in 2018, where were they for a test match, our inaugural test match in Ireland? They got a really good test. We gave you a good rattle. You ended up beating us rightly. And then Misbah went and did some press-ups, didn't he?
Yeah, at Lord's.
At Lord's. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was the same tour.
No, that was 2016.
Was that earlier?
Yeah.
2016.
2018 was when we played Ireland.
Yeah, but then you still did a great tour after, didn't you? I think
we did. We beat England. It was a 2-2 series draw.
Yeah, there you go. So
the good old days when boxing used to win test matches.
Yeah. But my point is, it's only good for the full members. Yeah. Now, there's a whole other layer of stuff that's off the field stuff that I think both the lower full members and the best associates have to do better, which is try and commercialize those opportunities then. You know, get sponsors engaged, find a way to announce these fixtures well in advance. You can sell some tickets. You can just make, if you can run a series, like I would say Scotland at best with that Australia series might have broken even. Mm-hmm. And they sold out all 3 games with about 2,500 fans.
Yeah.
So that shows you the scale of the challenge. Yeah. But if you can do that, the cricketing benefits are so extreme. And they're on the field cricketing benefits. At Brandon McMullen making another 50 against Australia, but it's Chris Greaves getting to talk to Adam Zampa for 30 minutes after the game about how to bowl leg spin. And most of these top class, and that's one of the great things about the franchise stuff now. I'd be more of an international fan than a franchise fan, but the democratizing effect of franchise cricket, meaning that it doesn't really matter where you're from, and if you're good enough and you kind of get into that circle and you start to mix with those players, you just learn and get better, don't you?
Yeah. I think that's what we've seen with a lot of the Afghanistan players, right?
100%.
They've been globetrotters in league cricket, and look at how well they did in T20s.
Look at Ramanul Gurbaz.
Yeah,
Gurbaz
Is there a better white ball batter going
It's
around?
incredible.
And I wonder, like, why wouldn't the full members want to participate? There used to be a time, especially in Canada, if I look at from the Canadian POV, Pakistan and India used to tour Canada.
Yep.
They used to have games here in King City. And
The Sahara Cup.
the Sahara Cup was here. Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Canada had a tri-series here a few, like in 2006 or 7. Yeah.
West Indies came up in 08.
Exactly. And so as now with like an inherently diasporic generation living here with Indians and Pakistanis and Sri Lankans, why wouldn't they come? Is what my question is. Like, I would love to see a Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Canada tri-series. Let's have it, you know, at the Brampton ground or in King City. And I feel like there is a big incentive there. I just don't understand why the full members wouldn't do it.
So much of our sport comes down to the commercials, the dollars and cents.
Dollars. Mm-hmm.
And if there are ways, and I think there are some innovative people who are really trying to bring those times back. But the problem is there's so many leagues now.
Yeah.
Finding time within the schedules is difficult. But I'm hoping that particularly what we saw there with, you know, Australia tacking on to tours, I think that needs to happen more often. I think when Pakistan are going down to South Africa, I think 3 T20s in Windhoek in Namibia would be incredibly good for them.
Yeah.
And it would be good for their cricket. And again, if you can give these associate boards the bit of advance notice, say, look, in 6 months, we've got a tour to South Africa. If we come for 3 games, do you think you can make it a success? I think every associate board that's worth its medal is going to bite your hand off for that.
And it gets exposure to these associate nation players as well. Because like, I wouldn't have never guessed, but there was a time where Wiese was just like a national hero in Lahore because of his
David Wiese.
David Wiese. It was just like
legend.
And he's an associate player. Like it's baffling how much love he gets from Lahore because of what he's done for the Qalandars. And that would have never happened in another situation, maybe even 10, 15 years ago. And so that's why I feel like it's more important to shed light on the associate teams and have the full members take responsibility. Like, I would love to see India play more associate teams. And because of the power that they have and the weight that they carry, it would benefit these guys, especially monetarily, 100%, and just exposure-wise. Right?
Preaching to the converted here.
At this point,
I couldn't
India has a better opportunity to grow cricket in associate nations.
Yeah, and look, Jay Shah's coming in as chairman of the ICC. I think some have commented negatively on that on social. I probably see it the other way. I think that, you know, the reality is that India is the most powerful cricketing nation in the world. I think if you look at what he's done with the Asian Cricket Council, I've done a lot of work for them. They've got the most amazing program of events, and that's why the Asian teams are all getting better. That's why your Omans, your UAEs, your Nepals, your Hong Kongs, your Kuwaits, your Malaysias, your Singapores are all improving. And they're getting, it's not just about the senior men's events, but there's also senior men's, senior women's, emerging teams. So they send A teams from the 5 test nations with the best teams of the leading 3 associates. That's kind of like an under 23 cup. There's under 19s. There's even under 16s. And there's just all of a sudden a whole pathway. And I think what Jay Shah was doing as the chair of the ACC, the Asian Cricket Council, he'll now go on to be the chair of the ICC, was trying to grow the game in Asia. So I'm hoping that that's maybe a good barometer of the fact that he would like this game to grow. And I think sometimes India get a hard rap in terms of they don't play a huge number of associates. You're right. In fact, I couldn't tell you the last time they played one outside of a World Cup. Might actually have been Ireland back in 2007. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What they do from a kind of state cricket perspective, they're very generous in terms of hosting teams. Sides like the Netherlands and Namibia have very good relationships with those countries. You know, Mumbai send high performance teams over to Oman with really good competitive cricket. So there is obviously a lot of money within Indian cricket, and they do kind of branch their wings out in other ways that aren't the senior Indian men's side playing against, you know, the senior national side of another country. I guess if you look at the commercials, would a series India hosting the Netherlands be attractive enough for them to make that work? Maybe not. But what might be possible is, okay, the next time India tour England, can we look at having a little tri-series in the VRA,
Yeah.
you saw the success of that England-Netherlands series in the Super League a couple of years ago, where at least there's a couple of games, and that might be part of a prep tour where India might not have their Kohlis and their Sharmas in that squad. They'll do that often when they send aside to Zimbabwe. You'll see it's the kind of next generation. They use that as a developmental tour, but that's a key thing. Some people say, okay, let's send an India A side or a Sri Lanka A side or a West Indies A side to Canada. That's no good in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's okay from a cricket perspective, but you can't make it work commercially because broadcasters aren't going to pay to broadcast something that's not an official T20 or an ODI. So even if, Nicholas Pooran isn't available, but you could get a West Indies side here in Toronto, I think you could still make that a big success.
Yeah.
And I suppose what's probably been, people's eyes have been open to a little bit from this World Cup is the strength and depth in the associates. I think if I actually looked at those that were most likely to win games in this World Cup, I probably certainly wouldn't have had Canada towards the top of the list. And I might not have had USA at the very top either. I would have thought that Netherlands or Scotland, look, they got so close against England and Australia. And I might have even had a Nepal quite close to the top of that list. So there's a real depth there all of a sudden. Like I said, Papua New Guinea, if it wasn't for Andre Russell hitting 25 off 11 balls.
Yeah.
Imagine that. The whole narrative's completely different then.
Yeah, that's true.
PNG with Phil Simmons in the camp of beating the West Indies.
Imagine that.
They'll be writing the post-mortem again for West India.
Oh my God. No, this was, you're absolutely correct. Spot on with that. This was the World Cup of close calls. Like associate nations really showed up and they wanted to have competitive cricket and they made it almost like a blockbuster.
I think we'll see in 2 years, I'm pretty certain, I think we'll see a lot more than 2 wins from the full members over the associates.
Yeah,
and again, Zimbabwe are going to have to play well to get out of Africa. We might have 9 associates there again.
Yeah. You've covered some really interesting events in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done Under-19 World Cup.
Yep.
World Cup qualifiers.
Yep.
And you've had the opportunity to commentate with some big names like Ian Bishop.
Yeah.
What's it like calling the game as it's happening, especially with someone as experienced as Ian?
Yeah, look, I think the thing, I'm probably somewhat unique with regards to the spectrum of cricket that I have done. I have done club cricket in a field in a provincial town in Nepal, right the way up to Sunset and Vine, Star Sports, ICC TV productions with, 28 cameras and the very best broadcast crews in the world with the very best voices in the world. So I feel somewhat uniquely fortunate in that case. It's also a big part of, I guess, how I've hopefully become quite an effective communicator and commentator. And I would hope that my love and passion for the sport shines through. I've been really lucky with the people I've worked with in terms of, like, I won't lie and say that the commentary box is an intimidating place when you first go there at elite levels. There is aspects to it that are somewhat of an old boys club. That is gradually breaking down, no doubt. But generally, I've had really good experiences. Someone like Bish is, he's different gravy. And what again shines through in his commentary is the scale of preparation that he does, and the amount he cares. And I'll share again one little self-indulgent story from the World Cup, where I would have loved to have commentated on that tournament with the 9 associates being there, and I probably ran it close, but didn't quite happen. But I was there. The ICC brought me out to do the warm-up games and do some digital coverage, and then do radio commentary. So it was great to be there. And that Nepal-Netherlands game was unbelievable. And Bish actually referred to it in, I think he was asked in the final what his thoughts on the tournament were, and he said that was 7,000 Nepal fans flying from every corner of America and beyond was his, absolute unforgettable memory from that competition. Like, how brilliant is that? The 50 odd games, that's what he remembered more than anyone. But I popped up to the commentary box just to see him because I knew he was there, and I was like, hey mate, and he was incredibly kind to me in terms of, wishing me well and wishing that I'd been there on this. And he knows my affinity with Nepali cricket, so he couldn't believe, that I wasn't there. He's really kind about that. And he said, what's it like out there? Because I'd done a couple of laps I actually hadn't done a couple of laps. I just walked from the entrance right to the side and kind of, taken about 2 hours to get across because every single person who saw you wanted to come and say hello and explain, how excited they were for the first game. And it was delayed by a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
So we were about an hour. We just like an hour, and it was amazing. And this one guy I met from Australia who had flown up specially. And I said, God, that's incredible. You've come all the way from Melbourne. He goes, yeah, man, I sold my car to be here.
Wow.
I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, no, I couldn't miss Nepal's first World Cup game in 10 years. And I was kind of, interactions with Nepal fans in particular are quite emotionally overwhelming often, and they're like, I'll be having the most normal day and someone will stop me and tell me, just how much I mean to them and to Nepali cricket, and to shine a light on what their country is. So you do get these experiences quite often, but this one just stopped me in my tracks. And he said, yeah, I sold my car to be here. I'm sleeping on my friend's couch. He's living up the road. And I told Bish this story. And again, I hope Bish doesn't mind me telling this, but this is the kind of guy that Bish is then. Bish then used that on commentary. And with my blessing, I'm not saying he took that from me. I was so happy for that story to be told in a much better way than I've just told it to the wider world. And, that absolutely captured what that day was and what that meant to an entire nation. And that's the scale of passion you're dealing with. So yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent.
No, please.
I haven't really answered your question, but yeah, to sit with guys like that is fantastic. And I adore the most basic productions where we're working with 3 to 4 cameras and you're commentating every ball for 100 overs. And then it's a real luxury to go into some of the best broadcast booths in the world and have 3 30-minute stints in a T20 or 3 5-over stints in a T20, and you get to do it in a completely different way. And yeah, I've worked with people who've never commentated a ball before, and I've worked with people I absolutely admire and adore, like Ian Bishop and Michael Atherton. And I'll tell you something, I've learned from absolutely every part of that spectrum, and you learn from people every time you sit into the booth.
How is it like commentating for a straight 100 overs? Please tell.
Because Sunday I wanted to come and say hi to you after the game or during the game, and I was told that you're commentating, and I said, he's going to take a break. Is somebody coming in and Andrew's going out? Can I talk to him on his break? And they're like, no, he's doing the full game, 100 overs.
Explain that.
It's unique, and it's also a byproduct. Like, they have moved heaven and earth to cover. They cover every single ball. The ICC cover every ball of both pathways to the men's and women's T20 World Cup and 50 over World Cup. Like, the scale of that undertaking, I don't think people appreciate or understand. You're talking about venues from as disparate a group of places as Samoa, like the sub-regional qualifier recently, to Papua New Guinea, to Uganda, to Rwanda, to Indonesia, I think they're in Korea next week, to Nepal, to Toronto and King City, to Buenos Aires, and everywhere in between. And the scale of facilities and the spectrum of that is unbelievably varied. They're in the National Stadium right now in Kenya doing Challenge League, which is a historic, wonderful ground that's hosted brilliant teams of years gone by. And the following week, they'll be in a literal field with no internet, no power, and everything's got to be brought in, and everything's got to be freely available on ICC TV. It is phenomenal. And I don't think people understand the scale of work that goes into that and the labor of love that it is. And sometimes things don't work. And I understand how frustrating that is. Me more than anyone, because if you're flying to the ends of the earth to put in all this preparation to try and do as good a broadcast as you can, and then when you click on the button, it doesn't work. It's like, we'll be right back. I feel the frustration more than anyone. But I also understand it's actually insane what they're trying to do. I don't think there's another sport that's going to these lengths. So I think it was in the last cycle, 541 games. In this 4-year cycle, I think they're talking about over 800.
And how many of those games have you covered?
Well, obviously you can't do them all. A lot of them are concurrent events. I do a huge amount of them. I think I've done over 1,500 internationals now. Probably, yeah. I don't, certainly since the pathway events have started, I don't think nobody will have done more international cricket than me.
How do you keep the passion of cricket alive? Because cricket's sort of become a job for you, where you've got to be at these grounds, cover 100 overs, commentate the whole thing.
Yeah, as of today, that has never been an issue. And I'm almost a bit sadistic in how much I love cricket. I like the reason I was probably a little bit late when I was watching the Ireland-South Africa game. I was trying to work whilst watching the Ireland-South Africa game, whilst checking the score in the England-Australia game. Look, I live, breathe, eat and sleep it. I adore it. I think even in the most boring phase of an ODI, I find huge fascination in what's going on. There are so many layers to cricket. And particularly in the associate game, which is so dramatic, so unpredictable, and with so much riding on it every time, I cannot think of a game I've done, certainly in international cricket, where I've been in any way like, come on, will he just end? And then I'll be sitting with someone, and you know, at the end of the over, they'll mute, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're so boring."
Really?
I'm like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm not naming any names, but like, yeah, I adore the game. I would hope that shines through pretty strongly, and I guess if that changes at some point, maybe I'll have to reconsider. But look, I'm on the road 340 days of the year, 340 days of the year, and I don't want that to change a little bit.
Any standout games that you recall that's the top 5 in your list?
So many. The USA-Canada game, given we're in this part of the world, in Antigua, was the regional qualifier to get through to the next phase of what was a failed campaign for both sides to get to the 2020 World Cup. Was truly ludicrous in the Coolidge Stadium. You should have a watch back of that. You can feel free to steal a video of it.
Is that the one with the last ball?
Yeah,
that was insane.
Utterly insane.
That was like,
I just watched it yesterday.
I felt like that was a clip from like Village Cricket. And you were calling it out and you were like losing your mind. I could see your face almost.
And I was also, and this again, like these are the small things within very small productions. You know, our production crews on these ICC Pathway events are 4 people and 2 commentators. So sorry, the reason we have such a small crew is the only way they can do that financially is by keeping things so tight. And, you know, in that particular instance, I was trying to, whilst commentating, signal and explain to the guy who's doing the camera switching, stop looking at these guys celebrating because over there they're running. You know, and this game is still on. The guy has not given this run out, and stop focusing on the Canadians sprinting off and losing their minds. They might actually run all 3 buys here and get the win, let alone the 2 for the super over. That stands out.
Who won super over there?
USA smashed them, yeah. Bob Stephen Taylor smashed it everywhere, destroyed them.
Again, no solace in this podcast.
No, the poor old Canada have not got the wood over USA of late. But yeah, look, I think March 16th, UAE, Nepal, March 16th was the most extraordinary and ludicrous game of cricket I've ever seen. Again, what that meant to the nation, to win 11 from 12 for Nepal. I think there was probably, I'm not exaggerating, inside and outside the ground, about 30,000 people there. Mm-hmm. And again, in that particular instance, because you can check the clip out, it's had 30, 40 million views online. It was the 40-second clip that's gone viral. There isn't even a ball bowled. It's the conclusion of the match with the umpires taking the bails off and deciding that the light is too bad and that they're going to go off, and Nepal are ahead by a few runs on Duckworth Lewis. And I think in my entire life, I've never got as lucky with a piece of commentary because I had no idea what was happening and I was guessing what was going on. The match referee was in a room 50 meters away. I couldn't speak or communicate with him. I had no idea. I did at least have a DLS sheet, so I knew they were ahead. But I really guessed, I guess instinctually, having watched so much cricket, knowing the way in which Nepal sprinted on, that was very much one of celebration. And all I've really done in the call is actually describe what's happening on the field. And God, even when I watch that one, I still get the goosebumps thinking about just how incredible that was. They were really in heavy danger of losing ODI status, and to win 11 from 12. Monty decided, the now head coach described it as 11 miracles in 12 games, and each one of them needed a Netflix episode to explain just how ludicrous it was. But look, there's so many more. I'm probably forgetting things. I think, yeah, being on call for Ireland, winning that test match against Zimbabwe is pretty special as an Irish cricket badger growing up. To see Ireland win a test match on home soil, I never thought I'd see that. And there's been kind of a lot of personal, intimate relationships you build up with players over the years. Gulshan Jazz maiden ODI century was definitely something I'll never forget. For some reason, I stood up when he started coming to the crease, and 59 balls later, I was still on my feet, and he'd made a century in 59 balls at the age of, I don't know what he was, 18. I think a Joshua Little 6 for against Zimbabwe. He very nearly got 7, and he hadn't played for Ireland a bit, and people were questioning whether he cared. And you could see how much that meant to him, because I know inherently from knowing him from such a young age as to how much he cares about playing for Ireland. It's kind of the things you can't describe at points that really stick in the memory.
On a lighter note, there was also a moment that's become a meme in Pakistan cricket. Recently, you were interviewing Mohammad Rizwan in the post-match of the Pakistan versus Ireland T20I series.
God,
and you were telling him about you just equaled or like matched Virat Kohli's record.
Oh, yeah.
About the averages. And Mohammad Rizwan says, if you look at average, you are an average player. What did you make of that response from Rizwan?
I actually remember that. I remember that vividly. It was obviously only in May. I spoke to him before, and again, it's the things you don't see on camera. So I was speaking to him before. I don't really know Mohammad. I'm not claiming to, but from everything I know about him, he's an incredibly charismatic guy, and he lived up to that in its entirety with the 3 games you were covering. So what I always do, and I do this before a toss, I do it before a flash interview, before a post, try to put the person at ease, because some people are very nervous on camera, and also some people almost always are not speaking their first language. And that's something I want to be really cognizant of, particularly with regards to the fact that I'm an Irishman who sometimes speaks a bit fast. I constantly try to slow down. and sometimes the person I'm talking to won't understand what I'm saying. So I had a good long chat with him before. We had 3 or 4 minutes before we were back from the ad break. And I said, I think he was player of the match that day. And I said, Mohammad, you're brilliant. I wanted to ask you a little bit about X, Y, and Z, and we're going to talk a bit about this, that. And he goes, very short interview, only very short. And I said, Mohammad, you're going to be brilliant. And he goes, no, I don't speak great English. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you speak perfect English. I said, no problem. So yeah, I guess the Kohli thing I'd found out during the context of that game. We didn't actually have a stats guy on that. I'd looked that stat up myself. I thought it was really interesting. I think he was I think him and Kohli, the only 2 averaging over 50 with more than a certain number of runs in
3,000 runs,
in that form. I think it was even, but if you set the bar even lower, it's like a very, very rare thing in T20 cricket in particular. So I thought it was a great comparison. And his answer was, I think it turned into a meme because some people almost thought it was rude. I thought it was like, I thought it was a real fascinating insight into his approach to cricket and him putting the team first and him putting the match situation first. And I'll tell you something, I think he's the most brilliant player. He really is.
I think with Mohammad Rizwan, he has sort of a knack of having these iconic post-match presentations. He has one in the 2023 Cricket ODI World Cup where he said sometimes when he was cramping up, he says sometimes acting, sometimes cramps. And like people literally want that on a shirt. And now it's like this one. Like if you look to your average, then you become an average player. And like people are just quoting him on nonstop.
The thing I would love to get across, and hopefully this comes across in my commentary, is that cricket is fun. You know, we get away from, I know it's such a serious thing, particularly in India and Pakistan, and it's a religion and it's life or death, whether your country wins or loses. But come on, why did we get into this sport in the first place? Why do we love the sport? Why did we start playing it? Why did anyone pick up a bat or a ball when they were a kid? It's an honor and a pleasure, and it's fun to be involved with. And sometimes we get lost in the maze and the madness of the importance of someone's approach or the strategic decision, or it's like, come on guys, it should be, I know it's serious, I know it's professional, I know you're desperate to win, but it's also, this is something that spreads a lot of joy, and often in parts of the world where people don't have a huge amount else to be happy about. And a lot of modern life can be pretty tough. Why can't we celebrate the sport that we love?
100%, Lenny. Thank you very much. I just have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. We asked our Patreon subscribers that you're coming on to add any questions. We have 2 that we picked out.
Awesome.
Zan Ali asks, is there a current associate team that could win a tournament in the next 10 years? If so, who and why?
To win a World Cup?
Yeah. A tournament, Champions Trophy, I guess. Well, World Cup. Yeah, Champions Trophy would be a bit more of an ask.
They can't get there because of the madness of the ODI rankings.
Of course, yes.
I think it'd be a huge stretch to say they'll win a World Cup.
Yeah.
I think you could see one go to a semi-final on a really, outstanding tournament. Everything goes right. And actually, if you consider Afghanistan were in World Cricket League Division 3 10, 12 years ago, playing against, Argentina and the Bahamas. Mm-hmm. And realistically, they probably should have got to a final and could well have won it, apart from a pretty interesting wicket down in Trinidad. That's the potential growth curve.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, in many ways, are the poster child and poster boys of associate cricket.
Yep.
Everyone thinks of them now as a test nation. But again, I know from knowing some of the boys, they still very much feel like they're a small nation at heart. They always had this insane self-belief. Like they went to the first World Cup they played at in the West Indies, the T20 World Cup back in 2010 or whatever it was, thinking they would go and win it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that was massively misplaced, but 14 years later, they're on the precipice of it. Mm-hmm. And, they're one of the best white ball sides in the world. Yeah. And who knows, they might even go and win a Champions Trophy now. But I think, look, for the very, very, very best associates, your Scotlands, your Netherlands, your USAs, and then those with probably the highest potential ceiling in the medium to long term, your Nepals, your UAEs, your Canadas. I don't think winning a tournament is necessarily what a tournament is all about. Certainly getting to the knockout stages like USA did in the getting to the Super 8 was a huge achievement. And again, you turn a few things in their head. Manik Patel got a shoulder injury in the aftermath of beating Pakistan. He slipped on the bus on some ice, apparently. Yeah. So, if he was actually fit, they may well have beaten South Africa in the Super 8. Then all of a sudden they're a game away from a semi-final. Yeah. So I think probably winning the tournament's a bridge too far, but something like knockout stages and who knows, maybe a semi-final is actually a possibility, like we saw with Kenya in 03.
100%. And then the last question we have from Taimur Bani, I think it's a very genuinely adorable question. Thoughts on what the USA can do to build on the recent success to make it sustainable, rather than this be a flash in the pan based on the current talent pool? And he also wants to know if he's crazy when he tells his wife that he's planning for his 7-month-old daughter to go to college on a cricket scholarship.
I love the last part of that question. Yeah. I do think the concept of getting into the NCAA system and having cricket as a
varsity sport.
Exactly. Yeah. Could be ludicrously transformational and maybe actually be the kind of missing secret sauce that would be necessary to take cricket from what it is in America, which is, a minority sport with it punches above its weight, to becoming a much more mainstream sport and an acceptable sport for what you would describe as kind of primetime athletes to get involved in. And I think you could do it, particularly within the women's game, with real success and real ease. So maybe the latter part isn't the most insane idea for 20 years' time for her to be going to, I don't know, Stanford or somewhere on a cricket scholarship. Yeah. God, I tell you, there'd be lots of applicants. Yeah. About that. Look, American, I want to actually not just describe USA cricket here, but North American cricket is scarily rich in potential. One of the things I always describe about all the associate boards and even the full members, you can't be a good performing team on the pitch without a good performing team off it. And so much responsibility lays in the hands of the administrators. And look, I'm not going to get into the details of the difficulties that both USA and Canada have been through. Mm-hmm. USA is on notice again right now.
Yep.
ICC have formally put them on notice for their membership, which is one step away from suspension, which is one step away from expulsion that they've already been through less than a decade ago. So it's an incredibly difficult sport to administer in both of these countries because of the geographical challenges.
Yep.
But if you think that there's maybe 250,000 weekly players in the United States, maybe 150,000 or something like that, at least in Canada, they are numbers that other associates would kill for and die to have. And there are so many good players going around, it's scary. I think getting the best teams on the park correctly prepared is a huge responsibility of the boards. And they probably, being honest, need to do a better job at that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the potential is really, really huge. And that's why I think in Namibia or in Netherlands or in Scotland, they were doing so many things right off the pitch. And that's why they've got elite performing sides. They look on with a bit of envy at the resources and the potential and the facilities that they have in USA and Canada. So I think sleeping giant is a pretty fair statement for both of the countries. And you almost kind of want someone to grab both of these countries and get all of the aspects of their houses in order, their domestic structures, the way they look after their players, their facilities. There should be better facilities. There's some great facilities now in America. What Major League have done with Grand Prairie is world class.
Yeah.
But for Canada to be a country and an economy its size and to not have more than the 2 ODI venues that they have in the Cricket Skating and Curling Club in King City, which has its challenges, and then
I think there's a total of 3 turf pitches in the whole Toronto area.
And there's 120,000 cricketers in the GTA.
Yeah.
We play on matting.
Like, come on. How is everyone not getting their heads together and saying, hold on, if we can get a $50, subscription from each player each year, what can we do with that, investing it correctly? The problem is the old ugly aspect of all cricket administration is maybe necessarily people. Sometimes it's very good-willing volunteers who just are a little bit misplaced in terms of what they're trying to do. But other times it's kind of people maybe not necessarily in it for the right reasons and the professionalism is a bit lacking. I hope it gets there. And I really hope that stuff like the World Cup in June is just really a kickoff and a launching pad. USA will be at the next World Cup.
Yeah.
Canada, unless you slip up against Bermuda or maybe an Argentina or a Cayman Island, should be there.
Yeah.
And, going to India and Sri Lanka for a World Cup, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. No, Lenny, thank you very much for your time. I know you have much important commitments with the Blue Jays game coming up.
Oh, Blue Jays!
It's almost we're running behind. I got to drop you to the GO station as well.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. But no, I really appreciate you showing up. This was a lovely conversation. I wish we had more time. We would have gone an hour and a half more. Honestly, you're a lovely orator. Would love listening to you talk for hours. And
thank you so much.
Hopefully, when you're back in town, we'll get you back for round 2.
Anytime at all. Real pleasure, guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.